In 2008, while banks around the world collapsed like dominoes, one country's economy barely blinked, while its neighbors drowned in debt. This tiny nation kept getting richer. It has no oil, no vast farmland, no coastline, not a single natural resource that should make it wealthy, and yet it has the highest average wages in Europe, one of the lowest unemployment rates on Earth, and a currency so trusted that in every global crisis, investors run toward it, not away from it. This is a country surrounded by war for centuries that never fought in one, a country split into 4 languages, 3 religions, and dozens of tiny mini-states that, by all logic, should have torn itself apart a long time ago. So how did Switzerland pull this off? And more importantly, is there a hidden cost to this success that almost nobody talks about? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand the real reason Switzerland never seems to fail. And it's not what most people think. Let's start with the land itself, because everything about Switzerland begins here. Switzerland is small, smaller than the U.S. state of West Virginia. 60% of it is covered in mountains. The Alps don't just look impressive on a postcard. They physically shape the entire country's fate. For most of European history, mountains meant one thing: protection. Armies could not easily march through them. Trade routes had to squeeze through narrow valleys and mountain passes. And whoever controlled those passes controlled something incredibly valuable: access. This is the first, often overlooked, reason Switzerland became rich. It didn't produce goods. It controlled the roads other people used to move goods. The Gotthard Pass, for example, became one of the most important trade corridors between northern and southern Europe. Merchants moving goods between Italy and Germany had to pass through Swiss territory and pay for the privilege. But the mountains did something else too. They isolated small communities from each other. Valleys became almost separate worlds, each developing its own dialect, its own laws, its own local government. Instead of one king ruling everything from a palace, Switzerland grew as a patchwork of small, independent communities that had to learn to cooperate, not because they wanted to, but because geography forced them to. That single fact, small, isolated, stubborn communities forced into cooperation, becomes the blueprint for literally everything that follows. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Switzerland's neutrality is usually taught as some kind of moral choice, a peaceful nation that simply chose not to fight. But the real story is far more strategic. After centuries of Swiss mercenaries fighting and dying in other countries' wars, Switzerland made a calculated decision in 1815. It would never take sides in a European conflict again. The great powers around it actually agreed to this because a neutral Switzerland sitting between France, Germany, Italy, and Austria was more useful to everyone as a buffer zone than as a battlefield. This neutrality wasn't just about avoiding bloodshed. It became an economic strategy. While the rest of Europe was busy destroying itself in 2 world wars, Switzerland stayed open for business. Money, gold, and refugees from every side flowed into Swiss banks and Swiss territory because Switzerland was the one place guaranteed not to pick a winner. This is also where Swiss banking secrecy was born. In 1934, Switzerland passed strict banking privacy laws. On paper, it was about protecting citizens' financial privacy. In practice, it turned Switzerland into the safest vault on the planet for legitimate savers, but also, uncomfortably, for dictators, war profiteers, and people hiding money that shouldn't have been hidden. By simply staying out of the fight and keeping its doors and its vaults open, Switzerland absorbed enormous amounts of wealth that other countries lost through war and instability. Neutrality wasn't just peace. It was quietly one of the most profitable business decisions in modern history. Here's the next piece of the puzzle, and it's political, but stay with me because this part explains why. Switzerland almost never has a crisis of leadership. Switzerland doesn't really have a single leader the way most countries do. There's no powerful president making unilateral decisions. Instead, the country is run by a seven-member council, and real power is spread across 26 semi-independent cantons, almost like 26 mini-countries inside one country. And then there's the part that sounds almost unbelievable. Ordinary Swiss citizens can force a national vote on almost any law, collect enough signatures, and the public directly votes on tax policy, immigration rules, even constitutional changes. This is called direct democracy, and Switzerland uses it more than any other country on Earth, sometimes voting on multiple issues 4 times a year. Why does this matter for the economy? Because it makes Switzerland incredibly resistant to sudden, reckless decisions. No single politician can gamble the country's stability on one bad policy. Change happens slowly, deliberately, and with broad public buy-in. Investors hate surprises. They hate sudden nationalization, sudden tax changes, sudden political chaos. Switzerland, almost by design, produces very few surprises. That predictability alone is worth billions. It's a huge part of why global companies and global money trust Switzerland more than almost anywhere else. Now, let's talk about what Switzerland actually makes, because this is the part people usually get wrong. Switzerland isn't rich because of watches and chocolate, even though those industries do exist and matter. It's rich because it figured out something most countries never do. When your country is small and resource poor, you can't compete on quantity, so you compete on precision. Swiss watchmaking didn't survive by making cheap watches. When Japanese quartz watches nearly destroyed the industry in the 1970s, Switzerland didn't try to compete on price. It doubled down on craftsmanship, engineering, and prestige, turning watches into luxury objects rather than tools. That single strategic shift saved an entire industry. The same pattern repeats everywhere in the Swiss economy. Precision instruments, high-end machinery, and most importantly, pharmaceuticals. Companies like Novartis and Roche turned Switzerland into one of the world's leading centers for medical research and drug development, industries that require enormous trust, enormous precision, and very little raw material. And behind all of it is something Switzerland invested in more seriously than almost any other country: vocational education. Roughly 2/3 of Swiss teenagers don't go straight to university. They enter structured apprenticeship programs, learning a skilled trade directly inside real companies. The result is a workforce that is extremely skilled, extremely specialized, and extremely hard to replace. When your economy is built on precision rather than volume, that kind of workforce isn't a nice bonus. It's the entire foundation. So, is Switzerland really this perfectly self-sufficient fortress, isolated in its mountains, quietly perfect, needing no one? Here's a twist. The image of Switzerland as an independent, self-contained country is almost the opposite of the truth. Nearly 1 in 4 people living in Switzerland today was born in another country, one of the highest foreign resident percentages in the entire world. Swiss hospitals, Swiss construction, Swiss farming, and even Swiss banking depend heavily on foreign workers commuting in every single day, especially from neighboring France, Germany, and Italy. Switzerland also imports almost all of its oil, gas, and most of its raw materials. It isn't in the European Union, but its entire economy is deeply wired into EU trade rules and agreements, because without smooth access to its neighbors, the Swiss economic engine would stall almost overnight. And that famous banking secrecy that helped build Swiss wealth? Under massive international pressure, Switzerland was forced to significantly weaken it after 2008, sharing far more financial information with foreign governments than it ever used to. So the real secret behind Switzerland isn't isolation. It's not some untouchable fortress in the Alps that needs nothing from anyone. It's the opposite. Switzerland built one of the most interdependent economies on the planet, deeply connected to its neighbors, deeply reliant on foreign workers and foreign trade, while carefully projecting an image of quiet, independent perfection. Switzerland doesn't succeed because it stands alone. It succeeds because it mastered the art of staying deeply connected to everyone, without ever fully belonging to anyone. So, was Switzerland's success built on isolation? or on connection. Personally, I think this changes how you should look at the whole story. Let me know in the comments. What surprised you the most about Switzerland? Was it the neutrality, the direct democracy, or this twist at the end? If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to like this video. It genuinely helps this channel grow. And if you're new here, subscribe to Atlas Aura, because every week we break down the geography, economy, history, and future of the places that shape our world. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.